Welcome to the lecture series of Professor S.K. Paul, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students and teachers of English, today I am going to deliver my lecture on critical evaluation of Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. In The Road Not Taken, the speaker describes him or himself as facing a choice between which of two roads to take. The speaker's choice functions as an extended metaphor for all the choices that the speaker and all people must make in life. Through the speaker's experience, the poem explores the nature of choices and what it means to be a person forced to choose, as all people inevitably are. The poem begins with the speaker recounting the experience of facing the choice of which road to take. The speaker's first emotion is sorrow, as he or she regrets the reality that makes it impossible to travel both roads or to experience both things. The poem makes clear that every choice involves the loss of opportunity, and that choices are painful because they must be made with the incomplete information. The speaker tries to gather as much information as possible by looking down one road as far as I could. But there is a limit to what the speaker can see, as the road is bent, meaning that it curves, leaving the rest of it out of sight. So the speaker, like anyone faced with a choice, must make a choice but can't know enough to be sure which choice is the right one. The speaker, as a result, is paralyzed. Long I stood contemplating which road to choose. The speaker does eventually choose a road based on which one appears to have been less traveled, but the poem shows that making that choice doesn't actually solve the speaker's problem. Immediately after choosing a road, the speaker admits that the two roads were worn really about the same, and that both roads equally lay without any leaves trodden black by passerby. So the speaker has tried to choose the road that seemed less traveled, but couldn't tell which road was actually less traveled. By making a choice, the speaker will now never get the chance to experience the other road and can never know which was less traveled. The speaker hides from the psychic pain by announcing that he or she is just saving the first road for another day. But again, reality sets in. I doubted if I should ever come back. Every choice may be a beginning, but it is also an ending, and having to choose cuts of knowledge of the alternate choice, such that the person choosing will never know if they made the right choice. The poem ends with the speaker imagining the far future when he or she thinks back to his choice and believes that it made all the difference. But the rest of the poem has shown that the speaker doesn't and can never know what it would have been like to travel down the other road, and can't even know if the road taken was indeed the one less traveled. And further, the final line is a subtle reminder that the only thing one can know about the choices one makes in life is that they make all difference. But how, or from what, neither the poem nor life provide any answer. Individualism and nonconformity in the poem road taken, road not taken. In the road not taken, the speaker is faced with a choice between two roads and elects to travel by one that appears to be slightly less worn. The diverging roads may be read as being an extended metaphor for two kinds of life choices in general, the conventional versus the unconventional. By choosing the less traveled path over the well traveled path, the speaker suggests that he or she values individualism over conformity. The speaker, when deciding which road to take, notes that the second is just as fair as the first, but that it has perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. In other words, the second road had the added benefit of being less well worn than the first. Notably, the absence of signs of travel is phrased positively rather than negatively, rather than stating outright that the road looked as if it had not had many travelers. The speaker states that it was grassy, a consequence of low foot traffic, and that it wanted wear, as if it were almost asking for the speaker to walk on it. The speaker presents non-conformity as a positive trait and even implies that popularity can make things less appealing. The first road, because of its popularity, lacks the grass that makes the second path so enticing. Despite the speaker's preference to nonconformity, though the poem ultimately remains ambiguous about whether choosing the road less traveled necessarily leads to a better or more interesting life. First, the poem questions whether it's actually even possible to identify what is not nonconformist. After choosing the road that seems to have been less traveled, the speaker then comments that in fact the two roads had been worn really about the same. The speaker seems to sense that though he or she has attempted to take the road less traveled, there is no actual way to know if it was traveled. Sound. Second, the poem subtly questions its own final line, in which the speaker asserts that choosing the road he or she had taken has made all the difference. Many readers interpret this final line as being an affirmation of the speaker's decision to venture off the beaten path. But note that the poem is careful not to state that choosing the road less traveled has necessarily made a positive difference. Further, because the poem has raised the possibility that the path the speaker took was not in fact less traveled, it also raises the possibility that the speaker is wrong and taking that particular path cannot be said to have made by specific difference at all. There is also a third option offered by the poem, which is that the speaker is correct and that choosing that road made all the difference, but that this difference was created not by taking the objectively less traveled path, because no one can measure precisely which path was traveled, but rather by making the choice to try to take the less traveled path. In this reading, the poem implies that it is the effort made to take the less conventional path that makes the difference. Making meaning of the poem. In the road not taken, the speaker must choose between two roads without having complete information about how they differ. Even after having chosen the second road, the speaker to Mukatika Shalom. speaker to unable to evaluate his or her experience because the speaker can't know how things would have been different if he or she had chosen the first road. In the final stanza, the speaker imagines him or herself in the distant future, looking back on this choice. In this way, the poem engages not just with a choice being made, but with the way that the speaker interprets that choice and assigns it meaning after the fact. It is only when looking back after all that the speaker sees the choice of which road to take as having made all a difference. Many people read the poem straightforwardly and believe the choice did make all the difference. The poem, however, is not clear about whether the speaker's final assertion is true. The speaker explains that he or she chose to take the second road because it seemed more grassy and less worn than the first, but soon admits that the two roads were actually worn to about the same degree by raising the question of whether there was actually anything special about the road the speaker chose to take. The poem further questions whether taking the second road could have possibly made all the difference or even any difference at all. The poem implies that the speaker in the future may look back and construct a narrative of his or her life that is simpler and cleaner, and which gives the choice more meaning than the truth would support. Using the interpretation, the poem can be read as a commenting more broadly on how all people fictionalize fictionalize their lives by interpreting their choices in hindsight as being more purposeful and meaningful than they really are. The poem can also be read in a third and more positive way through. In this third interpretation, the poem implies that it's less important whether the speaker's choice actually made all the difference than it is that he or she believes that it did. In this reading, the poem recognizes that the speaker and all people fictionalize their lives by creating meaning where there may not be any, but portrays such meaning making not as fraudulent but rather as a part of being human. All these of all three of these different possible readings coexist. In the road not taken, the poem does not suggest a solution to the question of the meaning in the speaker's choice, but rather comes to embody the question itself, allowing for contemplation of the mysteries inherent in defining or interpreting a life. The famous opening lines of The Road Not Taken introduce readers to the choice the speaker faces, which will become the main focus of the poem. Two roads diverge, and the speaker, unable to travel both, must choose between them. It is important to notice that right from the start in line 2, the speaker reveals a sense of sorrow at having to choose between the two roads. He or she is sorry that choosing one road means missing out on the other. The speaker's struggle sets up one of the poem's main themes, the role of choice and uncertainty in life. It also reveals something important about the speaker's attitude towards the role of choice in life. His or her sense of regret that one is forced to choose, and that choosing one thing means not choosing another. The speaker's regret lingers through the rest of the poem so that even after he or she has made a decision, it is difficult not to wonder about what would have been had he or she chosen the other road. One of the core ironies of the poem is that it does not actually matter which road the speaker chooses, since both roads would have would have would leave him or her with a feeling of regret about what he or she might have missed out on. The poem's title also speaks to this dilemma directly, not only signaling that the focus of the poem is the road not taken, but even implying that there will always be a road not taken, and with it an unshakable feeling of regret over what one might have missed. Frost himself even indicated at one point that he may have modeled the speaker in this poem after an acquaintance of his named Edward Thomas, whom he described as a person who, whichever road he went, would be sorry he did not go the other. In light of the choice presented in the poem's first lines, the most obvious guiding question for the poem may at first seem to be which road will the speaker choose. But if one keeps in mind that the speaker will struck with a feeling of regret no matter which road he or she chooses, that guiding question then becomes how will the speaker deal with his or her feeling of regret at having been forced by the demands of life to choose one road rather than the other. Diverging roads in the poem. The entirety of the road not taken is an extended metaphor in which the two roads that diverge symbolize life's many choices. In much the same way, the people are generally unable to see what the future holds. The speaker is unable to see what lies ahead on each path. Furthermore, what little the speaker thinks he or she understands about each path at the moment of decision later turns out to have been less clear cut, underscoring the impossibility of predicting where one's life choices will lead. Just as there are no do-overs in life, the speaker acknowledges in lines 2 to 3 and 14 to 15 that he or she can only travel one road and will not be granted the chance to come back and try another route In these ways, the diverging roads in the poem symbolize all of life's choices, the confusion of having to make choices in the moment, the painful impossibility of foreseeing their consequences, and the sense when looking back that those choices defined your life even when you can't know in what way or even whether they did at all. The road less traveled. The entirety of the road not taken is an extended metaphor in which the road less traveled symbolizes the path of nonconformity. The speaker, when trying to choose which road to take, looks for the road that seems less worn. At the end of the poem, the speaker asserts that choosing the road less traveled has made all the difference. The suggestion being that he or she has led a life of nonconformity and is happier because of it. However, the status of the road less traveled as a symbol of nonconformity is complicated somewhat by the fact that the poem makes it clear that the speaker has no way of actually knowing whether the road he or she uh, choose was really the road less traveled. Both roads, after all, are worn really about the same. This, in turn, raises questions about the speaker's notions of individualism and nonconformity, suggesting that these ideals may not be as easily definable as the speaker of the poem thinks. In this way, the road less traveled is as much a symbol of nonconformity as it is a symbol of the difficulty of defining that ideal. So, poetic devices and figurative language in the poem. Extended metaphor. The road not taken is an example of an extended metaphor in which the tenor uh, or the thing being spoken about is never stated explicitly, but it's clear that the poet is using the road less traveled as a metaphor for leading an unconventional way of life. The entire poem then is an extended metaphor in which the walk in the road represents all of the many choices one faces in life. As with all extended metaphors, this one contains many smaller metaphors inside it. The bend in the road that the speaker describes in line 5 may be read as a metaphor for people's inability to comprehend the consequences of their decisions before they make them. The speaker's realization that despite his or her initial impressions, the two roads are in fact equally traveled lines 9 to 12 may be interpreted within the context of the extended metaphor to mean that everyone's life is unique no matter what path one chooses. Frost uses this extended metaphor to argue that life is full of moments in which one is forced to decide between two or more alternatives without complete information about what each choice entails. While the speaker attempts to rationalize his or her decision in the moment and to assign it meaning after the fact, as described in the last stanza, mirror the ways in which all people attempt to rationalize and making meaning out of the choices they make in life. Form. The road not taken is an example of formal verse, meaning that it rhymes and has a strict meter, but it doesn't adhere to any specific poetic form, such as a sonnet that dictates, for instance, how many lines a poem must have. The road not taken is a 20-line poem made up of four quintains, 5-line stanzas. The four stanzas loosely correspond to the four stages of speaker's engagement with the decision which the poem takes as its subject, weighing the different options, choosing to take the road less traveled, realizing the decision making process we flawed, and finally attempting to make sense of the experience despite this meter. The road not taken is written in loose iambic tetrameter, meaning that which line mostly consists of iambs, unstressed, stressed, and has roughly 8 syllables. However, Frost frequently substitutes anapaests, unstressed, stressed for iambs throughout the poem. For instance, in the poem's first stanza, each line contains 3 iambs and 1 anapaest. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. I'm sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down, one as far as I could, to where it bit in the undergrowth. Note that in the above, the order of iams and anapaests differs from line to line. For instance, the first line goes I am anapaest, I am, while the second goes I am anapaest, I am. Frost's approaches to meter is artful but not strict, lending the poem a pleasing rhythm while still allowing for him to employ an informal, reflective tone that doesn't feel artificial because of an unnaturally consistent pattern of stress. Frost's use of iams also lends the poem a steady rhythm, is walking step, 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 helping to capture the experience of the speaker's walk through the woods in the sound of the words. The road not taken is typical of Frost's work in that he lended to use traditional meters in his poems but adhered to those meters loosely rather than strictly. Rhyme scheme. The road not taken follows a strict ABAAB rhyme scheme. In addition to the poem's regular use of end rhyme, it also makes irregular use of assonance. The vowel sound ah, as in the word and, repeats throughout lines 6 to 12, adding to the pleasing musicality of the verse. While it was not out of the ordinary for Frost to use strict rhyme schemes of the sort present in the road not taken, it also wasn't universal. Sometimes his use of rhythm could be erratic. The speaker of the road not taken is anonymous and has no specified gender. While it is possible to argue that Frost himself is the speaker, there isn't a definitive evidence that what is the case, and in fact, there is evidence to suggest that Frost may have based the speaker in this poem or his acquaintance Edward Thomas. From Frost described as a person who, whichever road he went, would be sorry he didn't go the other. Further, there is an ironic distance between what the speaker is saying in the poem and what the poem itself seems to be saying, further implying that Frost is not the same as the speaker. The speaker faced with all the seemingly insignificant decision between two roads, makes a choice to follow the one that appears less worn, seemingly an argument against conformity, and then spends the rest of the poem reflecting on the decision. The poem ends with the speaker imagining him or herself in the distant future, reflecting back on the decision and believing that taking the road less traveled has made all the difference. The poem's ending reveals the speaker to be deeply concerned with the ways in which even small decisions may have far-reaching implications. However, the acknowledging in lines 9 to 12 that his or her decision was based on incomplete information, the speaker also acknowledges that the consequences of these decisions can rarely be predicted or controlled, and that it's often difficult to understand the meaning of one's choice in a broader context, even a long time after those decisions have been made. The setting of the poem. The poem takes place in a forest in autumn after the leaves have begun to change color. More specifically, the poem takes place at a spot in the woods at which a road forks into two. The two roads continue on from the fork, but the roads soon pass out of sight as they wind and bend in the undergrowth of the forest. A person standing at the folk can use that one of the roads is a bit grassier than the other, but they are equally strewn with freshly fallen leaves, and in truth, both roads appear to be bent about equally worn. However, while it's accurate to say that the poem is set in a forest, it is equally accurate to say that the poem is set in the speaker's mind. Throughout the first three stanzas, the speaker is remembering the forest, the folk in the road, and making the decision to choose one another than the other. And in the fourth and final stanza, the speaker imagines him or herself even further into the distant future and looking back from the vantage in time to the moment of choosing the road in the wood. This dual setting fits with the way that the poem seems to describe the speaker's straightforward decision about taking the less worn road in a wood, and also the way that the poem functions as an extended metaphor in which the speaker attempts to come to terms with a choice he or she made in the past. Literary and historical context of the poem. Although Frost was an American poet, many of his earliest poems were written and published in England between 1912 and 1915. Most Frost didn't associate himself with any particular poetic school or movement, but when he began to publish work more widely in the United States in 1915, still very early in his career. The Imagist poets were instrumental in helping to promote his work. Ezra Pound, for instance, favorably reviewed one of Frost's early collections, A Boy's Will, saying that Frost's style has just this utter sincerity. Frost's poetry might also be broadly considered to be modernist. The Road Not Taken appeared in 1916 as the first poem in the collection titled Mountain Interval. Mountain Interval and The Road Not Taken along with it were regarded as a turning point in Frost's career, marking a shift from the earlier poems that were largely dramatic monologues or dialogues to poems that were, as the Poetry Foundation describes them, brief meditations sparked by an object, person, or event. As in many of Frost's later poems, The Road Not Taken takes place in a pastoral setting in which the characters' actions take on symbolic significance to illustrate some general truth about human life in a time when many of his contemporaries were turning away from the traditional verse practices of the 19th century. Frost was markedly more conservative in his technique, always using traditional meters. He was influenced by 19th century romantic poets such as Keats in both his subject matter and his thinking about craft, but he made his poems feel distinctly modern through his use of colloquial and everyday speech. Historical context. Frost wrote The Road Not Taken at the start of World War I, just before returning to United States from England, as a poem about the impossibility of undertaking the significance of one's life choices. The Road Not Taken can be read in the context of Frost's personal life as he moved his family overseas, just as easily as it can be read in the context of world history, with a global war suddenly and unexpectedly erupting and and unpending people's lives. Take, for example, the case of Frost's friend Edward Thomas, after whom Frost reportedly modeled the speaker of The Road Not Taken. Thomas, after reading an advance copy of Frost's poem, decided to enlist in the army and died 2 years thereafter. So, dear viewers, this way I have completed my lecture today. My lecture on Robert Frost's poem Road Not Taken is finished. Thank you all of you.